Sehr verehrter Herr Bundespräsident,
Federal President, Excellencies,
Herr regierender Bürgermeister,
Lord Mayor of Berlin Müller, colleagues, members of the Parliament, Ms. Adichie, it's great that you're here today. To all the curators and artistic directors, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't happen that often that palaces become realities, that they become something real, and that they open their doors for visitors. And today we can see this happening. The architect of the palace I'm talking about is called Klaus-Dieter Lehmann, and I remember very well the day that he told us his vision of an equal dialogue of the cultures of the world in Berlin. That was back in 2000 in the Liebermann House at an event of the foundation I was chairwoman of. Your idea, Mr. Klaus-Dieter Lehmann, your vision for the future, to have the collections of the Ethnological Museum and the Museum of Asian Art, to bring these collections from their place of shadow in Dahlem into the center of Berlin, and to get into juxtaposition with all the great collections that we see at the Museum Island. And I was not the only one who was amazed by this idea. To give space to the openness to the world in the sense of the visions of the brothers Humboldt was a vision of cultural politics that was worth fighting for and working hard for. And this is what we have now. I can see a lot of my colleagues sitting here today. We have been working a lot in the past 20 years. Many of you contributed to this vision, not just staying a beautiful dream, but actually becoming alive in this Palace of Berlin. I want to thank Liam McGregor, Hermann Patzinger, and Horst Bredekamp. Those were the people that gave life to the idea of Mr. Lehmann with their passion for artistic exhibitions and for the arts, and they go beyond telling the story of the peoples. Maybe you remember, Mr. McGregor, when we met at a great visit in London, and I told you about this thing that I wanted to make reality, and you said, please let us make this noble project happen. And I never forgot this sentence. It was such a delight for me that 10 years later, when I asked you to be part of becoming the artistic directors of this project, you said yes. And I am delighted that all of you have helped us to make this happen. I also thank the Federal Office for Building and Regional Planning and the State of Berlin for the great cooperation, and all of you who have contributed in such an amazing way, especially the Foundation Humboldt Forum im Berliner Schloss and the architect Frank Steller and his team. We also should thank the Stiftung Preußischer Kulturbesitz, the Foundation Prussian Cultural Heritage, and their colleagues that have been working with the objects for years now with a lot of care for us, for your audience, and have prepared these great exhibitions while they were in sort of storms of press and media. 100,000 visitors after 140 days after opening this house during the corona pandemic. This is a great start, and you, Professor Dogelo, and your team made this possible. Thank you so much for your commitment. Please give a round of applause. And I also want to thank you, Mr. von Bodin, with your association Berliner Schloss, and 145,000 donors have contributed hugely to the reconstruction of the Berlin Palace. The total in the end was more than 100 million euros. And in this connection, the artistic collector, Mr. Naumann, should be mentioned too. He committed a lot to restoring the Museum for Asian Art and the museum becoming one of the best in our country, and therefore enriching the Humboldt Forum of many objects and artifacts. The Humboldt Forum is free of charge. This was a very important political claim that we could make happen, that everyone should be able to visit the exhibitions at the Ethnological Museum and the Asian Art Museum starting tomorrow. And together with the Museum Island, we see a historical and cultural panorama in the center of Berlin that teaches us knowledge and vision. Everyone can see the vision of the brothers Humboldt and feeling part of the world. And what this means, the London-born, Ghana-raised philosopher who teaches in the US, Kwame Anthony Appiah, who is part of the Humboldt Forum at the Consultants Committee, and in his book, The Cosmopolite, said, and I quote freely, "Cosmopolites think that in the terminology of language, of cultures, there are interconnections for starting a conversation. And as cosmopolites believe that we can even learn from those that have different opinions than we have about the cultural divide and beyond, to seeing what connects us humans and not to exclude the other, being in exchange with the other and learning from it." This is what the Humboldt brothers were envisioning in their time, and this should still be the truth and should tell us what the future should look like, because the other is part of our global world. It is part of multicultural cities as Berlin's. We see the other, in air quotes, everywhere. We click in the internet. We see people everywhere that believe and think in a different way than we do. And the Humboldt Forum is setting a starting point for a discussion and for communication, and this will be a big win for a world where we have clashes, and in many places walls are being constructed instead of bridges. This is a big promise that the Forum is making, and this is a huge task for the future of this house. With its expeditions, it can become a floor and a stage for the debates of our time, an arena for democratic discussions where different opinions on the world and worldviews come together, but it is also an invitation to cross these bridges and stay in debates and discussions. But of course, when this will become more than a dream, the Humboldt Forum has to set standards for sensitivity, honesty, and transparency when it comes to objects from colonial contexts. And I hope that this very open house will lead the cultural dialogue and will also have a culture of dialogue. And as Anthony Appiah said, the consciousness for being human in a world of the other. Professor Dorgalo, you and your team will hopefully have great ideas, will dare to experiment, will cooperate successfully with partners all over the world, and have also a little courage, maybe, and remembering the vision of the brothers Humboldt in facing globalization, and to keep the mind of the brothers in their voyage of the world, and to start dialogue of the cultures of the world. Thank you very much. And now I would like to give the floor to Frank-Walter Steinmeier, our federal president.
Vielen Dank, liebe Frau Grütters.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grütters. I would also like to thank everyone involved in this large project from a constructional and content point of view. So, here it is. Now what? The reconstructed Berlin Palace, the Humboldt Forum, it is without any doubt the heart of the new center of our capital, from a structural point of view, but also symbolically. In the large project of this reinvention of Berlin's center, it is the final piece, architecturally speaking. But when it comes to content, it is just the beginning. This palace and this forum are, because of its location and its chosen mission, a place of national significance. However, this place currently raises more questions than it gives answers. The open questions that this place raises are open questions of our nation, but they are also questions for our nation. Will we be able to take it? Some people think that this palace is unsatisfying, reprehensible, because it raises so many questions. Some people wish it had never been built, but now it is here. After all these years of fierce debates, after discarded, new, and finally agreed plans, it has been completed. Berliners, but not just Berliners, but also visitors from all over the world, they take ownership of it. They stroll through the courtyards. They sit outside in the sun. They visit the exhibitions that have already been opened. Hundreds of thousands of people have already been here, as we've just heard. But yet, it is provocatively unfinished. Therefore, I ask the question, will we be able to take it? Ladies and gentlemen and dear guests, I have always been grateful to be able to witness the growing and becoming of the Humboldt Forum constructually from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also from a content point of view. I still remember a warm summer evening in 1999 in front of the Chancellor Bungalow in Bonn when Klaus-Dieter Lehmann, who proposed the then Chancellor to redesign the Berlin Museum Island. That was a large vision. I was fascinated and excited. And I was also fascinated by his proposal to include the ethnological collections from the Museum in Dahlem to this reinvention of Berlin's new center. The global cultures, or the world's cultures, belong in the center of Berlin. That's what you were convinced of, dear Klaus-Dieter Lehmann. Instead of German navel-gazing, being open to the world. This is what convinced me at the time. And now, the world's cultures have arrived here, and I'm delighted to be here. And I would like to thank you, Mr. Professor Dorgolo, lieber Mr. Patigan, dear Professor Koch, for inviting me. The Ethnological Collection and the Asian Art Museum can now be seen here in this forum, and I would like to congratulate you. However, I am also aware of the fact that some of it is still controversial and will remain so. This forum is not yet finished, but as of today, it is the heart, or a heart, of the museum landscape of Berlin, and it is a large step for which I'm very grateful. But it is only the beginning. It is not the end, but it's the beginning of a project. Just as our present is a time of upheaval and of beginnings, here in this forum is not just a meeting place for science, art, and culture, but it is supposed to be a place of international dialogue, of critical and self-critical thinking and debate in the world and with the world. Dear guests, I think there has been enough criticism. There has been a lot of debate on this building and this place. Just because of its size, it self-confidently claims to fill a gap which German history has left behind. This new old Berlin Palace, it doesn't want to be anything less but the new old center of the city, the Republican heart of the new old German capital, a monument of democracy with Baroque facades. Can that work? You see, there are a lot of questions in my head, and I admit that I will not be able to find an answer to all of them today, especially not to a satisfying degree. But maybe questioning and doubting is a good approach for us visitors, a good approach to this building. It is, if you will, not a place of self-affirmation, but of self-questioning in the productive sense of the word, a place that doesn't leave us any time to rest. Such a place can be a democratic place. Looking back in history can show us which longing, which ambition, which hunger for power this place gave rise to over the centuries. Monastery, residence of princes, kings, emperors, marching ground, palace of the Republic, derided as ostentatious, but a very popular leisure destination, seat of the only freely elected East German parliament, and also a demolished asbestos ruin, a stage for artists, Humboldt Forum. This location reflects our history as no other, the misconceptions, the chasms, the violent rule and reconstruction, but it also reminds us that only for about 3 decades, so only for a very small part, our history is the history of a reunited, a free and democratic Germany. After peaceful revolution and reunification, Berlin's center became the point of crystallization for us becoming one nation, a nation that was looking for its lost center, not just architecturally speaking, reconstruction and demolition, a new building or replica, a modern building or Baroque building. The debate was as fierce as a religious war until the idea of a reconstruction prevailed. A Republican promise, as the German newspaper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung said, or a monument of a place without history, as the German newspaper Die Zeit said, the end of history, or a revision of history, a symbol of the failure of the idea of socialism, as Joachim Fest, one of the main proponents, justified the reconstruction. The battles of the past have been fought, but this reminiscence built in stone, crowned with a cross, a reminiscence of the Prussian Reich, cannot explain itself in this reunited democratic Germany. Its identity, this Humboldt Forum, this palace, still has to find its identity and its purpose in democracy. Now, which purpose that will be, this question is a different one than 30 years ago. Today, we can see clearly that the reunification was also an end. German division had been overcome, and we had solved the German question. But it was also, more than anything, the beginning of a process in which not just Berlin, but also German society as a whole was to change more radically than anyone would have been able to imagine, not just in the East, but also in the West. And this process has not been completed. On the contrary, our democracy, about 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification, is not done or not completed, and neither is the forum on the day of its inauguration. But also the world beyond our borders, this world has also become a different one. Today, we are a society that is globally connected, that is more diverse and pluralistic. And here in the center of Berlin, we can see it like under a magnifying glass. This Berlin, the center of Berlin has changed drastically over the last 30 years, and I don't just mean from a constructional point of view, but also with regard to what happens behind the facades, the old and the new ones. The world cultures have arrived, but in the dual sense of the world, here in the Humboldt Forum, but also outside of these fantastic facades. Here in Berlin center, the world is not just our guest. The world is also home here in the center. That sounds like a great advertising slogan, but as you know, it has also brought about profound changes. People from Turkey, from Italy, Greece, Spain, Portugal, from Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, from Nigeria, the Congo, Somalia, from Asia, North and South America. People from all parts of the world today live in Germany. And they have also become German, many of them. They belong to what it means to be German today. They are part of our national identity, part of an active citizenship that also engages in our national debates. They are not people with a migration background. We are a country with a migration background. So what is this forum called the Humboldt Forum be in this changed country, in this changed world? Well, as a first answer, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say the following. I couldn't imagine a better name for this place. The Berlin Center bows down together with the Humboldt University in front of these two great scholars. Maybe it is one of the many ironies of our history that Alexander and Wilhelm von Humboldt didn't really like Berlin, their hometown, very much, and only reticently returned from abroad. This name is a tribute to Wilhelm von Humboldt, the law expert, the linguist, the Prussian envoy to the Vatican, which, after he was ordered back by the Prussian King Friedrich Wilhelm III in 1809, founded the Berlin University, and whose innovative vision of unity of research and education, and whose ideal of overall encompassing education still shapes our university and our educational system. And it is also a tribute to Alexander von Humboldt, the great natural scientist, the explorer, and the philosopher, who is responsible for unbelievably important insights into the then unknown and so-called New World. His self-image as a universal scholar, as a researcher, as an explorer, was a stark contrast to the colonial explorations and exploitation and enslaving of the mere measuring and categorization. Him, who is often called the second discoverer of the Americas, we owe to him the modern insight that everything on our planet is interconnected. Everything is interaction, is interconnected. He wrote that into his travel diary. And could there be a more fitting motto for this forum, a forum that is not just a forum of self-reflection, what we as Germans like to do so very much, a forum where we confront the world, a globalized world where today more than ever everything is interconnected, where everything is interaction. If you take the name of the forum, of this tribute to Prussian Enlightenment, literally, then you know that this is also, the name is also the commitment of this place. Enlightenment also means to judge what exists by the judgment seat of reason, as Golo Mann once said. We as Europeans were proud of the achievements of Enlightenment, respect of human dignity, reason and freedom, all of these values of which on which our modern liberal democracies are based on. But when we take the claim of the people who lend their name to this forum seriously, then this forum is not just supposed to celebrate the idea of enlightenment, but it also has to take part or contribute to this enlightenment. And that means that the historical reality of enlightenment, the political history, it means to question the historical reality and the enlightenment of the political history of the Western modernity, on which shoulders the Western modernity was built, for which costs, with which contradictions, with which impacts, consequences, and injustices, and which consequences does it have for our world today. These debates are currently being debated, fiercely debated, and with a lot of urgencies. It is the voices of those who did not have a voice in Western discourses for way too long, those who were on the other side of the Western history of progress and still do. Black Lives Matter, racism, discrimination, global justice, colonial looted art, all of these debates are not only being carried out in the countries of the so-called Global South, but also here, as we can see, in all of Europe, but also in the United States of America. And I believe that it is necessary. In my eyes, it is historically wrong, but also politically dangerous to dismiss these debates as identity politics, as a struggle of disadvantaged groups, as a means for social division of us against them. No, these questions are, in the sense of enlightenment, universal questions. They concern us all because they concern our divided history. And if we think of the humanistic project, and if we believe in the humanistic project of enlightenment, even more our common future. The truth is that the universal does not belong to any one group. That's what you, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, once said to American students, and I'm delighted that you are here today and will soon speak to us, and I would like to welcome you. The history of each and every single person has the potential to be universal. That's your guiding principle. But the truth is that too many stories, way too many stories, have not been told or heard. Here in this forum, in these collections, they are supposed to be told and heard. And if we achieve that, then we've come a lot closer to the response to the question of what the purpose of this forum will be. Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, today we celebrate the inauguration of the heart of this forum. Without a doubt, and you will soon see it, ethnological collections are still very fascinating for a lot of people. The world's cultures come to us, and we're looking to what is foreign to us. We learn, and maybe we also understand in the Humboldt tradition. Researching, being curious, collecting. For the brothers Humboldt, this also means to free themselves from the limits of Prussia. And for us, it also means experiencing the world. But, and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie reminds us of that, there is also a whole other perspective, the perspective of many African states, which, rightly so, claim new credit. Especially the countries of Africa have lost an immensely large part of their art because of the raids of the Europeans. We grew up without knowing an important part of our historical legacy. That's what the Nigerian artist Emeka Ogbo said recently in an interview, and it is a sentence that has made me think a lot, and that I think we should think about a lot. We know today that the provenance of many of the artworks and objects from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America that are on display in our museums are still unknown. or have not been disclosed. What is even worse is that many of them have not been acquired legitimately, that behind it is also a history, a story of repression, of plundering, of raids, and of murder. Not a lot is clear, and we can see that there is still a lot of research that has to be done, and we can see this especially with regard to the debate on the beautiful Louvre boat. Well, as you know, the German president does not make museums, but museums that don't just present artifacts, that also face the question or the history of colonialism, have to look differently, or have to be different from traditional museums. In Dresden, Stuttgart, Brussels, Paris, and London, people talk about how this should look like, but also here in Berlin. And that's the way it has to be. Ethnological collections are not just shown for their own sake today, but they show our relationship to the history of the source communities, and they also try and track the traces of these connections today. And that goes beyond the question of what a museum should be, what the design of a museum should be. It is about our self-image and our responsibility with regard to history. We, and I mean Europeans as a whole, need to overcome certain patterns of thinking, and we need to accept different perspectives. That also means that we have to be open for debate with the countries and regions from which these artifacts come. And we will realize that the easy solutions purported by some are actually not easy solutions. Despite all criticism, the conversation has started, and we see the first results, the restitution of the significant Benin bronzes that were negotiated in cooperation with Nigeria. It's a signal of change, and I'm very grateful to the foundation, to the Prussian Cultural Heritage Foundation, the Humboldt Forum, to the Minister of State, and the Federal Foreign Office for their commitment in this process. The debate on origin and restitution and new forms of museum cooperation, but also support with regard to the construction of museums in these countries, needs to be led in these countries, not just with us Germans, but by all European countries with a colonial history. This process will be painful, that is for certain, but we as Europeans, we have a responsibility with regard to this history. Every country for itself, but also we as Europeans jointly. But now, what about our responsibility? It is more with regard to the history of the large colonial realms of France, Great Britain, Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, and Belgium. That's what many people believe. But as the German president, I would like to say very clearly, even if the German place only looked for its place in the sun very late, there is no reason for us to have a clear conscience, which is exactly why this reconstructed palace should be a reminder of militarism, nationalism, and German colonial rule. The truth is, when it is about colonialism, we, as Germans who are usually so aware of their history, have a lot of blind spots and gaps in our memory and also in our self-image. Here in the center of Berlin in 1884, 1885, the so-called Berlin Conference was carried out, which was better known as Congo Conference, where, upon the invitation of the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, divided the European powers and the United States of America divided the African continent. But part of the truth is also that German colonialism was not just a matter of monarchical ambition, but large parts of the population were for colonialism. Let's just remember the confrontations in front before the Reichstag election in 1907 that went down into history as the so-called Hottentot elections. Now, in our collective memory, German colonialism has either been glorified or, even more so, was fully forgotten. Maybe we didn't really want to know exactly which of these faraway places in then German Southwest Africa, in German East Africa, in today's Cameroon and Togo, and Kiachau, in today's China and Papua New Guinea, and in the South Sea Islands, Germans were colonialists and as such repressed, exploited, robbed, and murdered people. Bringing more light into the dark, that is not just a task for historians. The injustice that Germans carried out during colonialism is something that concerns us as a society as a whole, because in our country today, in our present day, there is also racism, discrimination, denigration of supposed strangers, up to violent attacks. I'm convinced that we will only be able to overcome the deeper roots of daily racism if we overcome the blind spots of our memory, if we try and confront our colonial past. Germans' involvement in colonialism, well, proof or evidence for that is Namibia. In the former German Southwest Africa, German so-called protection squads were responsible for the first genocide of the 21st century. It took a long time to recognize this German crime. It took almost a whole century. The crimes of then, they still affect the present day, and the lives of the victims and descendants of victims are still affected. They live in poverty. Many descendants of the Herero and Nama unfortunately still have to deal with the fact that their ancestors have not found a last resting place. Some years ago, the German government started entering into negotiation with the Namibian government and the descendants of the Herero Nama with regard to an agreement in which the crimes are called what they were, a genocide. And I believe, or I hope, that this negotiation will come to mutual agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, for the end of my speech, I would like to say the following. Jürgen Habermas wrote in a new essay that remembering our colonial past that we've tried to suppress for a very long time presents an important expansion of our political self-image without that trying to play down our memory of the Holocaust. I'm convinced that remembering the civilizational rupture that is presented by the Holocaust is unique in our national memory. It is part of our identity. And I don't say this as a historian. Historians lead their own technical debates on the uniqueness and comparability of the Holocaust. I say it as the German president, but I would like to add the following. Remembering the Holocaust doesn't prevent an empathetic and remembering of other injustices. On the contrary, the brokenness which the Holocaust left behind opens our gaze for the responsibility, for our responsibility with regard to history. The human dignity that is the basis for our constitution is the dignity of all people. The crimes of colonialism, of exploitation and repression, robbery and the murdering of 10,000s of people needs an appropriate place of remembering. We need to face this part of the responsibility of German history, of the German past, and this is always about living together in this country, in our country, where a lot of people from many different cultures of the world want to be home. If this forum really will become a forum, a place where these debates can be led and where we will find answers to the many questions that this palace raises, if we come close to answering these questions, that would also answer the question of the purpose of this forum. I trust that you, Mr. Koch, Mr. Pattinger, Mr. Dorgolo, that you and your team are trying to do exactly that, and that you will do everything in order to make sure that this will be done. So I would like to thank all three of you for your boldness and for your determination to also sometimes face criticism. Your task is a very difficult one, and it is very easy to criticize your task. But if we want to set out for new shores, if we want to have a different, enlightened understanding of the artifacts, of the objects, and the history, an understanding that deals intensively with their cultures and the social reality in the source communities, then we need people who are facing this task and this responsibility. In other words, people like you. And therefore, I would like to thank you. In the beginning, I said, now here it is. What now? And the answer is, now it is up to us. It is up to us to fill this building with purpose, with life, with debate. And I have the following wish today. I hope that you, that the visitors, and that we will all be able to achieve this together. Thank you very much.
gorgeous music. Thank you. President of the Federal Republic of Germany, Dr. Steinmeier, Mayor of Berlin, Minister for Culture and Media, Dr. Monika Grütters, Director of the Humboldt Forum, Professor Dagalo, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Actually, good morning-ish. It's almost afternoon. Thank you for having me here. When I was researching my second novel, Half of a Yellow Sun, which is set during the Nigerian Biafran War that started in 1967, a woman told me a story about her elderly father. It was early in the war, and they were in their Biafran hometown, feeling relatively safe because the war seemed far away. Then suddenly they heard the loud, terrifying sounds of bombing very close to them, and they knew that they had only minutes to leave their home and run into the interior for safety before the Nigerian soldiers arrived. The elderly father was a wealthy man, but the only thing he rushed to take with him was his ikenga, a piece of wood, a beautifully carved piece of wood. But it wasn't just a piece of wood. It was also the repository of spiritual meaning. The ikenga represented his chi, his personal spirit, as well as his ancestors, his guardian angels. I was struck by this story. This man, facing the possibility of never seeing his home again, chose the thing that mattered most to him. Of course, he cared about his material possessions, but he believed that those could eventually be replaced, while his ikenga was irreplaceable. There are ikengas in various museums all over the world today, and it is easy to forget as we stare and admire them behind cold and clinical glass barriers that these are objects that are religious, spiritual, sacred. Art lives in history, and history lives in art. Much of what we call African art are also documents. They tell stories. Some are literal in their storytelling, like the beautifully ornate Benin stool that was sent to the Oba of Benin by his people when he was exiled by the British, and which he looked at and immediately could deduce from the carvings the state of his British plundered land. Other sculptures and carvings are more metaphorical. They speak to the dignity of a people, to their worldview, to their aspirations. Some of the early Christian missionaries across the African continent were very keen on destroying African art. Carved African deities, which they told the Africans were just magic. I cannot help but wryly wonder what could be more magical than the story of a man who dies and then magically rises again, a man who also manages to magically give his body as bread. And I say this, by the way, as a newly returned Roman Catholic. The point is that belief systems vary, and as long as they feed the spiritual needs of a people, they're valid. We cannot be dismissive of a belief system merely because it is unfamiliar to us, just as we cannot be dismissive of a history because we are uncomfortable with it. So I'd like to tell a small story about a Nigerian woman who's married to a Belgian and has lived in Belgium for many years. She said once that she was shocked that her son, while being taught Belgian history, was taught nothing about Congo. They teach my son in school that he must help the poor Africans, she said, but they don't teach him about what Belgium did in Congo. Now, if her son does not learn that the modern Congo state began 100 years ago as the personal property of a brutal Belgian king who was desperate to get wealthy from ivory and rubber, If her son does not learn that the hands of Congolese people were chopped off with rusty axes for not producing enough resources to meet a task, because we collectively acknowledge that it is so. It is not that Europe has denied its colonial history. That would be too crude. It is instead that Europe has developed a way of telling the story of its colonial history that ultimately seeks to erase that history. The former French Prime Minister, Nicolas Sarkozy, gave a now infamous speech in Senegal in which he said, "I have not come to deny mistakes or crimes. Mistakes were made and crimes committed, but no one can ask of the generations of today to expiate this crime perpetrated by past generations." This is central to the story that Europe tells itself about its colonial history. It is a story that basically says, yes, colonialism happened, but. And whatever comes after the but is the focus of the story. What the focus on the but does is that it absolves. It frees Europe of responsibility, of a significant and traceable connection to the African present, and it allows Europe the glow of charity. But the truth is that the past does not merely tell us what happened yesterday, it also illuminates what happens today. If we acknowledge that present-day Europe is shaped by the Renaissance of 600 years ago, by the Enlightenment of 300 years ago, then surely we cannot say that what happened merely 100 years ago in Africa no longer matters. It matters. We are gathered today in this reconstructed palace, a beautiful place, but also a place that represents Germany's nostalgia for imperial times. When Kaiser William II lived here, German troops were killing children, women, and men in Southwest Africa. This building says that German history matters, even in a romanticized form. The history of Africa and Asia and Latin America must matter as well. We cannot pick and choose which histories and which points of view still matter, because to do this would be an ugly exercise of brute power. And speaking of power, here's a headline I just read in a German publication. The headline says, "Where do Africa's treasures belong?" Now imagine this headline differently. Imagine if it said, "Where do Germany's treasures belong?" It would be a redundant question, because of course, Germany's treasures belong in Germany. But the question would never even be asked, because there would be no circumstance in which it would be, because of power. And so it seems to me that what we are fundamentally grappling with in this space, in all of these questions about the Humboldt Forum, is power. Unequal power, how we navigate unequal power relations. And there's always been, to me, something shabby about unequal power relations. The victory feels colorless, almost unearned. So I spoke of Belgium and its colonial history, but what of Germany and its colonial history? Do school children here learn about Namibia, what was called the German Southwest Africa? Do school children know that 100,000 Herero people were murdered by the Germans? Do they know of the wells that were poisoned? Do they know of the women used as sex slaves and others as slaves in German camps? Do they know of the Nama people killed and of the Maji Maji revolt in German East Africa? And why should they know? Because to tell only one part of a story is essentially to lie. A story is true only when it is complete. Germany is Beethoven, and Germany is Bach, and Germany is also its colonial atrocities that have resulted in hundreds of African skulls being stored in the basement of museums here in Berlin, skulls of men whose spirits cannot be at rest, men who could well have been my great-grandfather had I happened to have been born in Eastern rather than Western Africa. It is only fair to fully own all of the stories of Germany. All countries have parts of their pasts that they're not proud of, that they would rather forget. But it takes courage to face those parts and bring in some light. And this is a time for courage. The courage to hear dissenting voices, such as those of the people who are outside right now protesting. They should be heard and included. They have valid concerns. The courage not merely to say, we take your criticism, but to follow it with action. The courage to say, we were wrong. The courage to say about art acquired illicitly, this is not ours. Tell us what to do with it. The courage to do provenance work and to actively use local knowledge. The courage to act and to act now and not become crippled by endless planning and endless talking. The courage to believe that it can be better. We cannot change the past, but we can change our blindness to the past. And why, by the way, is the term ethnological used for art from certain parts of the world and not art for other parts of the world? And then in discussing some of this art that we term ethnological, and I would argue that the language itself already suggests a hierarchy of value, when we talk about this art that was stolen, we're told that they cannot be returned to Africa, for example, because Africans will not take good care of them. It is not merely condescending to say, I cannot return what I stole from you because you will not take good care of it. It is also lacking in basic logic. Since when has the basis of ownership been taking good care of what is owned? This position is paternalistic arrogance of the most stunning sort. It does not matter whether Africans or Asians or Latin Americans can take care of the art stolen from them. What matters is that it is theirs. The brilliant Nigerian artist Victor Hikameno put it much better than I could, and in very Nigerian terms. He says, if I come and steal your wrapper, and I say I won't give you back your wrapper because you will not tie it properly around your waist, or you will not wash it well, and so the colors will fade, or this or that, all are irrelevant. The wrapper is mine, and I can do with it what I will. Give me back my wrapper because it is mine. The metaphorical wrapper, and for those of you who are befuddled by wrapper, it's a piece of cloth, should be returned for the reason that a Hikameno illustrates, which is respecting the property of others, but also because Europe has defined itself as a place of certain values: progress, liberty, fraternity, tolerance, individual rights, and most of all, the rule of law. A nation that believes in the rule of law cannot possibly be debating whether to return stolen goods. It just returns them. And so if the dignity of those from whom the art was stolen does not matter, then surely this idea should matter, that Europe should be what it claims to be. Live up to the ideals with which you define yourself. I should pause here and note that sometimes these conversations run the risk of sounding like empty moralizing, or like asking for the impossible or the unrealistic, or insisting on an unattainable purity and perfection. Obviously, I don't think everything should be sent back to the countries from which they came. Not everything was stolen. But those things that are sacred, those things for whom people were killed, those things that have in them the stains of innocent blood, should be returned. Obviously, we do not have all the information. There are facts lost in unrecorded history, but we can draw reasonable conclusions based on information that we do have. We can deduce, for example, that the Ngonso, the beautiful sculpture of the founder and guiding spirit of the Nso people of Cameroon, a former German colony, could not possibly have been obtained under benign circumstances, because why would you willingly give up your guiding spirit? It is also important to remember that not all wounds are visible. Some wounds we carry in our hearts, inherited from our parents, passed on to our children. But this discourse is, of course, not just about the Humboldt Forum. It is about museums all over Europe, in France, in the Vatican, in Britain. And I must acknowledge that Germany is the first of the powerful European nations that has made a gesture towards returning the Benin bronzes. But it is also interesting that the announcement said that a substantial amount would be returned, which made me wonder how this would be determined and by whom. And it is equally interesting that it is British colonial loot rather than German colonial loot that is being returned by Germany. But still, it is progress. And Germany's action, this gesture towards righting what is wrong, must be acknowledged. My acknowledgement of it is not to say that the work is done, but that the work has started, and that perhaps a place like the British Museum, and I know that Neil is here, which owns the majority of the Benin bronzes, might perhaps be inspired by the German decision, and that hopefully the British Museum will rethink, and that hopefully the British Museum will rethink its policy of retain and explain, which is unacceptable. So this is the Humboldt Forum. A forum usually implies, among other things, a space created for a free exchange of ideas. One can only hope that the Humboldt Forum will live up to its name as a space for true intercultural and transcultural exchange of ideas in mutual respect between the cultures. But this rhetoric, free exchange of ideas, must be practical. And by that, I mean such things as travel visas. It must be easy for people from Africa and Asia and Latin America who should participate in these conversations to get travel visas. The Humboldt Forum was conceived as a place to tell the universal story of the human race from multiple perspectives. This is a commendable idea, but it is incomplete. Because again, we must confront the issue of power. Who tells the story? Who is the teller and who is told about? Who decided that African art should be labeled ethnological? Who has the right to exhibit the other? Can the Humboldt Forum be an opportunity? Can it become, among other things, a project of remembering, solemn, honest, mutual, and respectful? In conclusion, I want to say that I believe very much in dialogue. And I really believe that we can recreate the world by acting more courageously. To act with courage is to have concrete hope in a better future. We carve out a small space of the world, we shape and we reshape it, and in that way, small slice by small slice, we walk slowly, yes, but we walk on the path to real progress. Courage and hope are intertwined. Courage is an act of hope, and hope is born of courage. Acts of courage create hope, and there is nothing more essential to the human spirit than hope. So here's to courage. Thank you.
Sehr geehrter Herr Bundespräsident, Herr regierender Bürgermeister,
President, Lord Mayor, Minister of State, Ms. Adichie, thank you very much for this very impressive speech. Ladies and gentlemen, finally some of the museums, or a part of the museums, are open. The museums and the collections that we've talked about for so long, we can finally see what they're all about. And the collections are the central actor in the Humboldt Forum. They have the largest space, the largest surface, and they are the spine, the backbone of the Humboldt Forum. And because of the debate on colonialism, there are a special focus. This debate has already led to a change of the position of museums. Large projects such as the Humboldt Forum that have lasted for about 2 decades are always also a process of learning. And I think the first results, and I would like to emphasize first results of this process, can be seen in the exhibition. When the exhibitions are successful and the Humboldt Forum are successful, this will depend on 2 factors. First of all, if we are able to make this difficult past productive, and how can we achieve a new form of cooperation, a view to the future. Without coming to terms with our past, there can't be a future. And this reappraisal of the past is based on 3 preconditions. First, the museums have to deal critically with the history of their institutions. But it's not just museums that were involved in colonialism and that benefited from the colonial system. And therefore, as the President said, it is not just a question of the museum, but also of churches and many other institutions. So it's a task for all of society, and it would be fantastic if this could be a focal point of debate. Now, the second factor, provenience research. And it's not just about in which suitcase a certain object went where, but it is about the circumstances of the acquisition. And the results of this research also has to be visible in the exhibition. Why are some of these objects critical with regard to the context of the acquisition? How do we deal with these circumstances? How do we also do it together in cooperation with the source community? And the third factor is the following: being prepared to engage in restitutions. We already restituted some objects to New Zealand, to Alaska. Soon there will be restitutions to Australia, to Namibia. The topic of the Benin bronzes has already been addressed. Yes, we are further than some other countries in Europe, of which the museum own a substantial part, and next year we will do these restitutions. But the significant point is that when we talk with our partners in Nigeria and many other partners, that we don't just restitute these objects, but that we build a joint future. And of course, today in the Humboldt Forum, you will see things that maybe tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, they won't be on display here anymore. And I was once in Benin City. When you see how motives of this art is visible at every corner, and you visit some galleries from some young artists, then you see that they use this tradition for their contemporary art, and that's why you can easily understand how important restitutions are. But restitutions aren't the end of this process. It's also about cooperation and participation, about the dialogue that Ms. Adichie was talking about, multi-perspectiveness and diversity, multiplicity. An artist from Namibia has made a patchwork blanket with photos from Namibia with which he deals with the colonial past, or doing joint research, including indigenous knowledge, cooperating with source communities. We have projects with Angola, with Tanzania, and many other countries. Interventions of contemporary artists from the source communities. We also have that. You see an installation from Justine Ngaga from Cameroon, in which she deals in her own way with the consequences, the political, economic consequences of colonialism. And it is also a question of jointly curating and jointly designing. I would like to remind you of the Wang Shu room, of the famous architect Wang Shu, the famous Chinese architect Wang Shu, who designed this room all on his own. And there was also a difficult history that he integrates in this work of art, the difficult history between Germany and China, but also the Boxer Rebellion, which was also a reason why many objects came to Berlin. But it's also important not to depreciate these objects. If we just reduce them to the colonial context, these objects also have a value themselves. They say a certain thing. They say something about mankind. And in our cooperations with the source communities, we can see that very often these communities want to tell very different stories than us, and they should also be able to tell their own stories here. Objects also open very long-term historical perspective to current questions or issues such as migration, climate change, and many more. Our goal has to be the following. It has to be the joint interpretation of important topics, and it is about nothing less important than our relationship to the world. Therefore, we say that the Humboldt Forum is a process. The inauguration is not the end of it. It is just a small step in our path towards the future. And on this path, we can see what is important. We are also learning. Who would know what is correct in all instances? We are willing to do better, and it is important that the exhibitions also reflect this willingness and that they dynamically change in dialogue and in cooperation with the source community. The Humboldt Forum is not a normal museum. It is a room for debate in a world that is constantly changing. Yes, there has been criticism and there will be criticism in the future, but it is also important to acknowledge that this criticism goes beyond the Humboldt Forum. We shouldn't see this collection as a burden, but as an opportunity, a tremendous opportunity. And we should also engage in a new kind of debate, and I hope that you will be able to see all of this in the exhibition. The Humboldt Forum is a community of learning, and we can be excited to see how it will further develop in the future. Thank you very much.
Liebe Frau Adichie,
Dear Ms. Adichie,
Herr Bundespräsident,
Federal President,
liebe Frau Grütters,
Ms. Grütters,
vielen Dank, dass Sie zu uns gesprochen haben.
thank you very much for your speech.
Alle Akteure,
I would like to thank you on behalf of all actors involved in this museum. I would like to thank you for your words and for your thoughts,
Ihre Impulse, Ihre
your
Aufforderungen,
impetus,
auch Ihre
and
Bestätigung
also
und Ihre
your
Unterstützung.
demands, but also your confirmation and your support.
Die tragen wir hinein
We want to take all of this into the further
dieses Ortes.
becoming, or the further process of the becoming of the Humboldt Forum in the Berlin Palace, to a place of multiplicity, a place of diversity, a place for visitors, a place for contributors from all over the world,
Hin zu einem Ort der
a
Selbstverständigung,
place
des
for
Miteinanders, der Selbstbefragung.
cooperation, of
Als einen
questioning,
demokratischen, einen offenen Ort.
a democratic, open place, to make sure that the Humboldt Forum has the opportunity to become an international platform for dialogue for the large global challenges of our time. This is our mission, as defined in the coalition agreement 4 years ago. The new presentations of the Ethnological Museum and the Asian Art Museum, as Mr. Patzinger just said, are of utmost importance for the project of the Humboldt Forum overall. They are the central starting points and frame of reference, the source for the programmatic profile of our museum. And they don't just make it necessary, but they also make it possible to have the necessary debates here in the Humboldt Forum that we've heard about today, the debates on colonialism and racism, about power relations, as you mentioned, Ms. Adichie, and discrimination, as well as debates about the diversity of human cultures, with a view to the histories that need to be re-evaluated from different perspectives at this place, but also for our action today and tomorrow. Everyone who is gathered here today and everyone who is working for this fantastic new museum is assuming this responsibility with respect, with hope, with the hope that many people, not just from Germany or Berlin, but from all over the world, will help us, will support us, and will also correct our direction, that you will be involved in the becoming of this place, that you will be able to contribute to the process of the development of this forum, that we will be able to listen to you, that we will be able to engage in debate with you, that we will be able to try and find answers and solutions in cooperation with you, be it in cultural or scientific events, in cultural or artistic projects, in our education and communication projects, or the many other opportunities presented by exhibition and museum work. And we do this with a very curious, with a very critical and interested audience. Over the first 40 years, we had about 100,000 visitors. Over the last 60 days, over 150,000 visitors, and they showed us that they are willing to do that. We would like to thank all contributors and all actors at federal and at a national level. We would like to thank all of the contributors and all of the different authorities in the Association for the Support of the Berlin Schloss, Maestro Stella, the architect, and all specialists, all experts who were involved with their decisions, with their criticism, and with their support, with their competencies, and with their motivation, with their donations, and with their creativity over the last 2 or 3 decades, depending on how you see it. The last 2 or 3 decades that it took to build this new project. I would like to thank all my colleagues and all people working for the Humboldt Forum. I would like to thank all colleagues in the Stiftung Stadtmuseum, Mr. Bauspies, and today I would especially like to thank Mr. Lars Christian Koch, my colleagues in the Ethnological Museum and the Museum for Asian Art in the National Museums of Berlin and the Prussian Cultural Heritage Foundation, because we all have this fantastic opportunity to participate in the design of a place that is culturally so relevant. We have a very impressive program for the opening days that we did designed together with the colleagues in the other access institutions, and we hope that this program will be able to give an impression of all of this over the next few days for many people. And I would also like to thank my colleagues in the Service Society and the Stiftung Humboldt Forum in Berliner Schloss, and everyone who was involved in the organization of today's inauguration. I would also like to thank the Resident Music Collective, our Resident Music Collective, if I may say. We've already heard from them, but we hope to be able to hear from you in the future as well. And we will hear a composition from them composed by Kitan Batin and Clemens Rinkowski for 15 musicians. And after the end of that piece, the delegation of the Federal President will stand up and go on a first tour of the exhibition, and you're all invited to remain seated and listen to one more piece before you can join the reception in the foyer. And from about 1 p.m. onwards, you will be able to visit the collection or the exhibitions of the Ethnological Museum and the Asian Art Museum in the West Wing on the 2nd and 3rd floor. The colorful cards, either blue or pink show you when you're supposed to meet for your slot of the exhibition. And if you have further questions, you can look at your program, or you can also ask my colleagues and from the visitor service. And please also make sure to wear your mask at all times. Ladies and gentlemen, and dear guests, we will become the Humboldt Forum. With today, we've reached another important milestone on this journey, and we're looking forward to all tasks associated with that, with all debates and discussions. We're looking forward to it. We're curious, and we are assuming that task with a lot of gratefulness, especially to you. Thank you very much.